and Bender, that kind of shit. So, I it's true. It's true. I forgot where I was at again. I just completely get lost when
You
I
talk about the Mexican restaurant. There's someone
yeah,
else.
and Greg is filming with his phone, right? Which he actually had a phone that had video capability, but after he filmed it, we were both so wigged out by what happened that I had to chase him around for like 3 weeks because he owned these 2 restaurants. Finally, I got him to show me the footage on the phone, and there it was, a triangle, right? And, when this triangle showed up, it came down out of this cloud, and this was on a night that President Biden or Vice President Biden was in town in the presidential conference room in Carmel, campaigning for Obama's reelection, right? And all of a sudden, I'm getting out of the truck, at this place in Seaside next to this bar. It's a Chinese restaurant. And my dog, Chewbacca, starts barking his head off. And I look over above this bar, and there is a hex. It's not a triangle at that point. It's more like a wedge in a door. And there was 5 things instead, so it was kind of like a cone almost of them.
Yeah.
And at first I thought it was like some kind of a thing that was, being flown, because there's a car dealership there. I thought, well, maybe this is something they're flying up there from the car dealer. And there's no wires, there's no cables, it's self-illuminated. And then they start changing shape, and they start getting bigger and smaller. And they're doing this glowing, winking thing, and they come down at one point so low that I can see that they're ribbed and that they are like expanding and contracting, and that they can expand a lot and contract a lot. Some of them went, like I said, from the size of a car, like a Volkswagen. They would shrink down to the size of a basketball if it became necessary. When they were passing each other especially, they would shrink down instead of moving around each other. So, I started running down the street like Paul Revere, right? And there's all these bars on. Yeah, the British are coming, and they're in fucking spaceships, man, come on, right? And I'm going into Mexican bars, right? The people are like, hey, what are you doing in here? I say, get out, right? I'm like, man, there's UFOs outside, okay? Comprende, Ovini. And he's like, get out, cabrón. And then the lady that owns the bar comes out, and she starts yelling all of them out. Next thing I know, the whole bar is standing out in the middle of the street. And that street, by the way, that we were standing on, they had just changed the name of it to Obama Way, if you can believe that.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
That's
so
weird.
half of us are these like old white guys who are like, man, look, UFO. The other guys are like, you crazy, man.
Fucking Gringo, what are you talking about?
Right, exactly. And so Greg comes out, and like a pro, he just starts hitting it with his little camera on his phone. And that triangle footage, the really impressive stuff where it comes down low over the street, it was filmed by him on that little phone. And so we couldn't figure out how to get it out of the phone for some reason. And so he sent it to a friend of his who posted it on YouTube. And just one day on a lark, I was like, I fucking bet $1 million because I could see the tower, I could see everything while this was happening. So I know somebody else had to have seen or filmed this, right? Aside from us. And so I go on, I just type in giant UFO triangle, Monterey, California, and boom, there's Greg's footage.
Wow.
Except it's on somebody else's YouTube page, right? So I had to get a hold of this guy.
Those bastards.
Oh, yeah, it was because, it had 7,000 views already, and he had only had it up for 3 months, right?
Yeah,
so
it's doing well.
Next thing you know, yeah, right. So next thing you know, I get interviewed by some CSETI people who, I have no ill will towards anybody who is studying this subject in the field at all. Good, bad, or indifferent, whatever they do or don't think about me. But some of the folks involved are just very, very that they of this mindset that they're kind of like prophetic, and that somehow they've been chosen and we're going to lead them. And some of these sea city people strike me that way, I try to communicate
a little too hard line.
Well, they think I'm some kind of circus carny, or that I'm just filming UFO, or that I'm filming planes, that are just bloomed out for bad photography. I'm like, no.
As if you don't know the difference between a plane. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also we went in the second film. Also, I'm sorry to just keep promoting it, but that's my job.
Do it. Do it.
The second film, we go to the top of the mountains that certain individuals who are rock stars, whose names I will not mention.
Okay, but I know you're not mentioning it, but is this certain rock star going to be in the second film?
We wanted to put him in the movie, but the first director who had him come up, to do that sighting, actually was very nervous about any kind of lawsuits or any of that kind of stuff. So out of respect to him,
Okay,
you know what I'm saying?
Somebody that we're going to pretend who it is.
Hang on to that footage. I know you're hanging on to it, but hang on.
Oh, it's up on YouTube. It's on my YouTube page.
Oh, wow.
It's Christo Roppolo with guests and Dennis. You can hear the person in question's voice very clearly.
I'll say this: our listeners, we don't even need to say it because we covered it enough and we love it.
Yeah.
And
I have respect for that person. I really do think he's a good person, but I just think that some people, no matter how much they think they know about this subject, don't realize that they can be punked. Okay,
yeah, I think there's a little bit of manipulation going on there, but that doesn't take away my respect for the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's some people, like I said, that are doing this that I just absolutely worship. And my parallel to my research is Jane Goodall. It's the woman who studied the gorillas and the myths, because everybody was laughing at her when she was telling them that they had these traits that were very human, and they was doing the same thing with Koko the gorilla in Santa Cruz.
Koko.
And now those
Koko was the sweetest. Rest in peace to Koko.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, any animal, for that matter, has a consciousness and a capacity to share love and emotion with people. I mean, it's a medical fact that your pet will lower your blood pressure, significantly, just by contact with it. Right. So it's and that's kind of the effect that brought me to really pursue photographing these particular objects, studying these particular orbs. Eggman, the big one that we started off kind of talking about a while ago, that's a majestic orb that I've only seen a few times. And the significance of bringing that orb up in the first film was that it kind of tied in with the thing that happened to the guy on the golf course, because in the time that I was observing that particular orb, and that particular orb was huge, and at that time, Mercury was making these weird orbital paths over the horizon, right? And this big yellow orb that I called Eggman, because it was bell-shaped almost, and it would rotate, was just this majestic thing. And it was never with any other orbs. It didn't travel in groups. And eventually, it just stopped showing up. But immediately after it stopped showing up, then this army of these other orbs that were not only having encounters with me. In the second film as well, there are some interviews that we did with some highly respectable people who had daytime encounters with multiple orbs in a tribe like I'm talking about, with little juveniles trailing behind an adult on these things that I can only describe to you. You'll see them in the second film as electrical braids, like tentacles, and the smaller orbs will take a ride and hitch along with the big orb that trails behind them, especially in daylight. They like to kind of attach to each other. But at night...
I want to bring something up real quick. You mentioned Jane Goodall and the work with the gorillas and everything. Have you ever heard of the Mandela Effect? The fact that
I've heard the term, but I'm not in relationship to
her. She's considered to be the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees, and she's had 55 years of studying chimpanzees, but everyone remembers it as gorillas. And I do too. You mentioned Gorillas in the Mist.
Well, she did do some stuff with gorillas. I remember there was some kind of a time where she was there. They weren't actually like big giant gorillas, but they were the small, because there's also this type of chimpanzee that is like huge. They're like, monstrously big. They live in the Amazon somewhere, and they finally documented those, and a lot of people misidentified them as gorillas. So
okay,
I stand corrected if they were.
No, it's not even that. I know. I I said it's a common what they call a Mandela effect. Where not just misremembering, where there's been some kind of change in our timeline and certain things are just changed. That's kind of what it is. Like the Volkswagen logo has somehow changed. Everyone remembers it differently. Certain movie lines.
The Berenstain Bears is one of the most famous ones. People remember Berenstain
It's called
Bears.
Mandela Effect because everyone remembers Mandela dying way before he did. It's like Fidel Castro. Everyone remembers him dying a few years ago. Evidently, he's still alive. I remember him dying. I remember him dying a couple of times. I'm sure you all do too. But we're getting off on a different subject.
I do remember this.
So this is Mandela Effect. It's worth looking into, and the fact that you brought up Jane Goodall in Gorillas, it's a really big one. Everyone's like, no, of course she's known for gorillas, and everyone's like, actually, if you look into her now, it's all chimpanzees. It's like, wait, what?
Right.
No, I remember from my youth, it was gorillas.
Wow.
I know.
That's a whole other level of stuff there too.
It is. Derail it with it. We can go on.
No. That interests me because I believe that that's connected to quantum, and that that's talking about how plot. See, the fabric of all of these multiverses, these universes that occupy the multiverse, is paper thin. But to transverse those things, it makes sense to me that something is just that any level of consciousness would eventually become that. And that would explain the concept of a soul, that would explain the concept of a Godhead, of a higher power, of angels. All of that stuff falls into this conceptual idea that's universal seemingly, that the higher we go in our vibration, our existence, our consciousness can eventually become just pure consciousness. And that, that would give us, and seems to me to give them, the ability to transverse between these different universes, because like the scientists that were talking to this about me said, look, there's completely different physics between these different universes. So you're right in signaling like this, because the way that we're going to eventually communicate and probably travel to these different places and communicate with these other intelligent the entities, whatever you want to call them, is with photons, because photons are something that can transverse, just like this consciousness can transverse. I had one of these physicists, astrophysicists from France, and that was the phenomena that got him the most. He actually sent the footage to the University of Montana, the University of Arkansas. They sent it to MOFON. Everybody got punked. They could not identify. They did the optical smearing test, where they'll take some of the shots that have slow shutter effects or any smearing, and they actually study the spectral, information that comes from those light smears, and they can actually tell you what kind of material something is made out of. What if it's a mineral compound, if it's metal, whatever. They can tell from that spectral information. They couldn't find anything in a periodic table that came close to it other than some type of frequency of light.